Watching Morning Live, thanks for staying with us. Now, images of Afghan citizens' desperate attempts to leave the capital city of Kabul and other parts of the country continue to shock the world after the return of the Taliban, who have now taken control of the country. Now, the Taliban declared the 20-year-old war over as they entered Afghanistan's presidential palace hours after the country's president Ashraf Ghani fled on Sunday. The United States has received a widespread criticism for what has been described as a chaotic and abrupt security and intelligence withdrawal of its security forces. So to get perspective of the possible security and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan and what the return of the Taliban could mean, we're joined by Na'eem Jeenah, who's Executive Director at the Afro-Middle East Centre. Na'eem, good morning. Thanks for speaking to us here on Morning Live.
Morning. Thank you, Sakina.
So, for a couple of days, we've seen very worrying images coming out of Afghanistan. But to be honest, this has been coming for at least a few months now. The scenes that we've seen have been absolutely chaotic, Na'eem, since the withdrawal of the United States security forces. But let's just try and put this into perspective, first and foremost, in terms of what is happening in Afghanistan at the moment.
Well, I think chaotic is a good word, Sakina, to describe not only the past couple of days, but according to the report of the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, it's an American oversight body, it sounds like it's been chaotic for the past 20 years, frankly, of the American occupation and involvement in Afghanistan. And so the shock of all of us, really, by which the Taliban took over the entire country in 10 days, is a reflection of that kind of mess and chaos that the Americans created in Afghanistan. So what we saw was that as soon as they started withdrawing in April, or the bulk of them withdrew by April, on the 4th of May, the Taliban started their operations. And then in 10 days, in the last 2 weeks, in a 10-day period, they took over 33 provincial capitals and then literally walked into the national capital, Kabul, without any resistance. What we're seeing, the scenes at the airport, etc., those people at the airport are mostly people that had been employed by the Americans in different capacities, whether employed at the embassies, employed as translators, employed as fixers, whatever it might be, who were promised by the Americans that they would be taken with when the Americans withdrew. And they're now getting left behind. The US is trying to negotiate with other countries, Qatar, for example, to receive about 4,000 of these people who basically the Americans will then dump in Qatar. So that's part of the chaos that we're seeing taking place.
So those who are trying to flee the country at the moment, absolutely terrified, or at least that's some of the looks that you see on people's faces as they scramble to leave. So what exactly are they afraid of, Na'eem? What is the history of the Taliban in Afghanistan? Who are they exactly?
Okay, so there's two groups that are, wanting to leave. The one group is, as I said, those who had been working for the US in different capacities. And then there are others who are afraid, as you say. I think if you are an Afghan today, there's good cause for uncertainty and fear. The Taliban ran or governed, if you like, Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001. They came in after the US-supported so-called Mujahideen governed Afghanistan from 1989, when the Soviet Union withdrew, until 2006, and until 1996 rather. In 1994, because of the mess that Afghanistan was in, and particularly wide-scale rapes, brutality, attacks on people, etc., the Taliban came in their terms to clean up the country. what we saw was a different kind of brutality that then took place, as well as curbs, for example, on women's education. Girls were, in most cases, girls were not allowed to go to schools. You had kind of gratuitous violence in terms of punishment for crimes that took place. All kinds of freedoms were restricted. People were not allowed to have televisions, all of those kinds of things. So many people that are afraid or uncertain right now either have memories of that time between 1996 to 2001, or their parents do. And I think that if you're living in Afghanistan, that's a legitimate concern, a legitimate fear. The Taliban, however, is saying that they are a new Taliban, not the same people, and not in terms of the personalities, but not with the same policies as they had then. They have been guaranteeing for the past few months at least that they've been in talks with the United States, that they will not put curbs on women's education, that they will not persecute minorities, that they won't persecute those who are part of the previous government and the previous army, etc. Up to now, in the past few days, we are seeing much of that they are adhering to. Of course, it's still early days, but certainly there have not been wide-scale attacks on people that have been part of the former government. I mean, Hamid Karzai, very publicly the first president installed by the United States after the Taliban fall, Hamid Karzai publicly 2 days ago came out into the street with his two daughters to meet with the Taliban to call for peace and unity. Abdullah, the former president, is still there and still in talks with the Taliban. The army hasn't been attacked. Yesterday, there were reports from UNICEF that Taliban people were going door to door, encouraging girls to go to school. So that on the one hand. On the other hand, we've had isolated reports, for example, in Herat about 3 days ago, that women were told not to go to university. In another place, women bank employees were told to go home. So there's a bit of a mixed signals coming with these kind of isolated cases that remind us of that period, late 1996. But the Taliban official position is that they are resolute in terms of changing things, and this being a kind of new Taliban, and they definitely want international recognition, international legitimacy. They're not going to do things like hosting groups like Al-Qaeda as they did in the past. So we wait and see what's going to happen.
So we go back then to the main objective for the U.S. troops to move into Afghanistan. And then we have this withdrawal of those security forces, which was, of course, first announced by former President Donald Trump. And now, 20 years later, countless lives lost. Where did it all go wrong? And have the Afghan people been failed by the U.S. and this withdrawal, do you believe, Na'eem?
To be honest, it's not only certainly the Afghan people have been failed. Many of those people you're seeing at the airport and on the tarmac feel profoundly betrayed and left in the lurch by the Americans. But it's not only the Afghan people that have been failed, the Americans as well. I mean, it's now clear that over the past 20 years, the American public has been repeatedly lied to by U.S. administrations. 4 presidents, as Joe Biden said last night, him being the 4th, 2 of them Democratic, 2 of them Republican. It was actually Obama who started the drawdown and the withdrawal of American troops. In fact, in December 2017, he had a ceremony where it was announced that the war is now over, and 2014, that the war is now over and American troops are withdrawing, mission accomplished kind of thing. In 2015, there were still American soldiers and contractors going back home in body bags. There were still large attacks against Afghan people by the American Air Force. So it's been one lie after another from the American administration, both to the Americans, as the Special Inspector General's report shows, both to the American public and various American institutions, as well as to the Afghans. So what we're finding now is that Afghan people feel really betrayed. Even the withdrawal, the last part of the withdrawal, I mean, Bagram, the Bagram military base, for example, which was to be handed over to the Afghan army, the commanders of the Afghan army discovered only many hours later that the Americans had just gone and left everything behind. There was no proper handover, etc. And so, one perhaps should not be surprised that that army that had been promised all kinds of things, training and all of that, was left in this kind of way and then didn't put up a great resistance to the Taliban when the Taliban surfaced. Joe Biden last night made a big thing blaming, entirely blaming the Afghan government and the Afghan army for not having the will to fight, as he said, etc. But really, his three predecessors and the U.S. military have a lot of that blame for what happened.
And just finally, Na'eem, geopolitically, could we see the situation in Afghanistan spilling over to neighboring countries? And what does that mean for regional stability?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the Taliban is very much a nationalist organization. They hosted Al-Qaeda in the past, which was transnational, of course, but Taliban itself is a nationalist Afghan organization. They have no intention of spreading beyond that. And as I said, the big prize that they're looking at right now is international legitimacy. They want that seat at the United Nations that is still occupied by an ambassador who reports to a government that doesn't exist. I mean, he has no one to report to at the moment. And that's the seat that they covet. And if they want that, they're not going to go beyond their borders. The real problem, of course, is the Afghan people. 35 million people, 2 million of whom are refugees, with a 72% of them living below the poverty line. What the Taliban is going to have to do now is open up the channels for humanitarian aid to flow in, work at ways in which they can build the economy and create confidence among the people in their leadership, move towards some kind of proper democratic elections, so that Afghanistan can begin returning to normal after the past 40 years, really, of mess.
Na'eem Jeenah, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time. Na'eem Jeenah is the Executive Director of the Afro-Middle East Centre, talking to us about the Taliban leadership taking control of Afghanistan and some of the implications of this particular development.